All right, so week one was pretty strange. There were a couple of backfields that didn't shake up exactly how at least I thought they would. We're going to take a look at those. And to begin, we have the Steelers' backfield with Najee Harris, Cordero Patterson, and Jalen Warren. In typical Arthur Smith fashion, he found a way to get Cordero Patterson involved. He had a 13% snap share and a 9.76% rush share. So pretty limited involvement overall. Really, what we're interested in here is the Najee Harris versus Jalen Warren split. When it comes to Jalen Warren, I wouldn't expect his 31% snap share and especially his 4.87% rush share to remain that low. I think he's going to be a little bit more towards the 40% mark here. I will say, though, in Arthur Smith's scheme, he likes to have a big power back. You'll notice even though the team selected Bijan Robinson, he made sure Tyler Algier got involved. Now, the Steelers decided not to extend Najee Harris, so it does, in a way, make sense for them to just use him as much as humanly possible. So that could be one factor at play here. But I also think Arthur Smith just likes power backs, and Jalen Warren can use power, and he's, in my opinion, more talented than Najee Harris. The advanced stats tell us that. But Arthur Smith is going to Arthur Smith. All right, so when we look at the snap shares, Najee Harris led the backfield with 56%, Warren was second with 31%, and Cordero Patterson was 13%. When we look at the target share, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren had the exact same percentage, 9%. They had 2 targets apiece. I expect that to remain relatively the same. What will change, though, is Jalen Warren only receiving 4.87% of the carries. Justin Fields being the quarterback also greatly impacted the running game. He had 14 carries himself. Overall, it was very inefficient for them. I was saying this during the preseason that their offensive line is not athletic enough to run what Arthur Smith wants. See, Arthur Smith wants, for instance, his tackles to be able to get to the second level to get to linebackers to allow creases for his running backs. I'm sorry, but the Steelers don't have the offensive line to do that. And I think the yards per carry, while it is one game, I think we're going to see more and more of this. And overall, it's an Arthur Smith scheme with poor quarterback play. I think we're going to see a lot of what we saw with Atlanta, with Pittsburgh this season. Overall, as long as Justin Fields is the quarterback here, it's going to handicap Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. Should Russell Wilson come back, I expect them to have much better receiving stats, at least, because there's no way that Russell Wilson is going to be running the ball 14 times. So overall, this is a situation that you could flex Najee Harris. I probably wouldn't want him as my RB2. I'd be really down bad if he was my RB1. And as far as Jalen Warren is concerned, I think he's a flex play when he's healthy. But this is a backfield to monitor. We are going to have to see, with another week's worth of play, where the split lies with Najee, Cordero, and Jalen Warren. Up next, we have the Bengals backfield, specifically Zach Moss and Chase Brown. I don't think anybody expected the Patriots to come in and run things, but that's exactly what they did. When we look at Zach Moss in particular, he had a 65% snap share compared to Chase Brown's 33%, so just about twice as much. When we look at their target share, Zach Moss had a 13.79% target share to Chase Brown's 10.34%. And when we look at their rush shares, Zach Moss had a 56.25% rush share to Chase Brown's 18.75%. So the key point here is that even when they're losing, it looks like Zach Moss is going to be leading this timeshare. It is a 1-week sample size, so it'll be really interesting to see what they do this week and in the future, and to look at the game scripts that they're facing and their usage in said game scripts. But I was pretty surprised personally to see this snap share. When we look at their targets, Zach Moss had 4 targets, 2 for 17. Chase Brown had 3 targets, 3 for 12. So they both received a decent amount of work in the passing game. And obviously, they're more likely to run the ball a little bit more when they're not losing. Going forward, assuming they're not losing their games every week like they did this past week, I expect more rushing volume. I think you can expect to see, 15 to 17 carries generally for Zach Moss per week, and then maybe 6 to 10 potentially for Chase Brown. I think they would have liked to run the ball a lot more, but they just weren't able to. And overall, Zach Moss was more efficient. He was more efficient in the passing game. Now, he only caught 2 of his 4 targets, but he had 17 yards on those 2 catches to Chase Brown's 12 on his 3 catches. And Zach Moss's 4.9 yards per carry was better than Chase Brown's 3.7. It'll be really interesting to see how this backfield shakes up from week to week, but if this is any indication of what we can expect, it would make sense if they're winning games for them to have Zach Moss in the game. He's the power back of the two. And considering they were losing this game and he still outsnapped Chase Brown, I don't think that's looking too good for Chase Brown. Moving on to Jacksonville, Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne split the rushes evenly. They both had a 46.15% rush share. However, in the passing game, Travis Etienne had a 10.53 target share to Tank Bigsby's 0%. And so Travis Etienne turned those 3 targets into 2 receptions for 15 yards. Pretty solid. I do expect him to, in general, be the receiving back. He is a better receiver than Tank Bigsby. And throughout the preseason, Etienne had looked like the much more explosive player. But in week 1, Tank Bigsby definitely outproduced him on the ground. I mean, Travis Etienne only had 3.7 yards per carry. He did score a touchdown, and he was about to score 2, but on the 1-yard line, he had the ball punched out from behind him, and so he fumbled. And so Tank Bigsby took advantage of the opportunities he was given. I mean, his 73 yards on 12 carries was good for 6.1 yards per carry. That's really good. If you're an owner of Etienne, I really wouldn't be too worried. It's 1 week. They used Etienne along the goal line. They used Etienne in the passing game. I think you have a pretty safe floor from week to week and a decent ceiling. It's just we're probably not going to see an RB3 finish again. So I would definitely temper expectations if that's what you're thinking. But we are definitely going to want to see a bigger sample size here. And the one thing if you're an ETN owner is he still played 70% of the snaps to Tank Bigsby's 32%. So there isn't as much of a cause for concern in the sense of playing time. It's just that if this trend continues, we're probably going to see that snap share even out to a degree. If you're a Tank Bigsby owner, you have to be pretty happy about this. There's definitely a chance if he continues to be this efficient with his rushes that he's going to get more playing time. But overall, it still appears as though Travis Etienne is easily the back to own here. That situation will continue to need monitoring. And now we have the Dolphins backfield. This, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting backfields to watch. So we already have an injury to Raheem Mostert. Devon Achane is a game-time decision. Remember that Jalen Wright video I made? I was telling people this guy is potentially a league winner. If Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert, either one of them miss an extended period of time, Jalen Wright is more than likely going to be the back that you want to own here. I understand that Jeff Wilson started over him and he was a healthy scratch this past week. But if you remember, Devon Achane was also a healthy scratch in week 1. So I don't think that's any indication that Jalen Wright isn't performing well. We all saw the explosion that he had in the preseason. He absolutely plays like a 4.38 speed running back. When we look at the snap shares from week 1, Raheem Mostert played 44% of the snaps, Devon Achane played 52%, and Jeff Wilson played 15%. When we look at their target shares, Devon Achane had almost a 20% target share. He ended up with 7 targets. That is awesome if you're an owner. Raheem Mostert had an 8.33% target share. He had 3 targets himself. When we look at their rush share, Devon Achane had a 40% rush share, Raheem Mostert had a 24% rush share, and Jeff Wilson ended up with a 20% rush share. Ironically, Jeff Wilson was by far the most efficient back. I mean, his 5 carries for 26 yards was good for 5.2 yards per carry. Devon Achane, he wasn't the least efficient. That was Raheem Mostert with 6 carries for 9 yards. But Devon Achane was incredibly inefficient. 10 carries for 24 yards, including a long of 9. That is awful. I do expect that to just be a week 1 blip in the radar, though. Devon Achane is clearly talented. He was one of the most efficient running backs I've ever seen this past season. So he's definitely going to bring those numbers much further up in the coming weeks. But once again, you have a 32-year-old Raheem Mostert and a sub, or at least right around 190-pound Devon Achane. These guys, with Raheem Mostert's age and injury history, as well as Devon Achane's size, are not built to really be durable. And so that's why I really liked Jalen Wright, along with the fact that he was just a good fit in this backfield. If Devon Achane does end up playing, I expect it to be somewhat of a rotation between Devon Achane, Jeff Wilson, and Jalen Wright. I'm going to be very curious what Jalen Wright can do, assuming he gets some run. I think he will. But yeah, this will definitely be one of the most interesting backfields to note this season. I'm not going to take a victory lap yet, but with the Raiders' backfield, I was absolutely avoiding Zamir White. I understand that he looked relatively good in the latter half of this past season. However, he just does not have the most receiving prowess. And they figured to be a pretty bad team. And while this is once again only one game, I really was worried about his volume and think that he was being overdrafted, as I suggested in my rankings videos for 2024, the running back position. And so what did we see in this game? Well, Zamir White only had a 38% snap share. Alexander Mattison had a 60% snap share. When we look at their target shares, Alexander Mattison had an 18.75% target share. That was 6 targets this game. He turned that into 4 for 43 and a touchdown. So he was incredibly efficient. I doubt that compared to Zamir White, that their target shares are generally going to decrease, because Zamir White, while he had a 6.25% target share, he turned that into 2 receptions for 2 yards on 2 targets. Incredibly inefficient. Now, when we look at the rush share, Zamir White did have a 59% rush share to Alexander Madison's 22.72. The way I see it, they're going to handicap each other. I think that Zamir White has a much lower ceiling than some people thought in general, because I still project them to be losing a lot of their games. So I just don't think he's going to get the volume. And then with Zamir White taking most of the running work, that's also going to limit Alexander Mattison. He's unlikely to have 4 for 43 and a touchdown every week, but I do think that he has a safer floor because I project them to be losing a lot of the games this season. And so out of the two, I would personally prefer Alexander Mattison, but this backfield I don't think is going to be anything that we can depend on much more than just for a flex play any given week. And so I hope Zamir White proves me wrong. I just think he was being overdrafted because of the nature of this team, and that I think they're going to be losing a lot of their games. And so I think this is just going to be a cannibalistic backfield. Just like with the Raiders backfield, I am going to wait just a minute before I take a victory lap. However, I was saying that Rachaad White was one of the worst runners of the football in the NFL. And while it's only, once again, a 1-game sample size, he had 15 attempts for 31 yards, whereas Bucky Irving had 9 for 62. This is the exact same offensive line. When we look at their snap share, Rachaad White had a 70% snap share to Bucky Irving's 31%. Rachaad White also, and deservedly so, had a 20% target share to Bucky Irving's 10%. Most notably, 30% of the targets were to running backs, and so that may change from week to week, but that is something to note. And when we look at their rush share, Rachaad White had a 50% rush share to Bucky Irving's 30%. When we look at Bucky Irving in the passing game, he had 2 receptions for 14 yards, so that's 7 a pop, whereas Rachaad White had 6 for 75, which is 12.5 a pop. I do think that Rachaad White is a better receiving back, but I think that Bucky Irving is a much better runner of the football. And so if this disparity in efficiency in terms of running the football continues, I think there's a very good chance that Rachaad White cedes a good amount of rush attempts to Bucky Irving. I think he's still going to keep his receiving role, and I still think he's going to be the preferred goal line back. He's obviously much bigger than Bucky Irving. But I'm telling you, he is one of the worst runners of the football in the NFL in terms of starting running backs. So what I see happening potentially is Bucky Irving increasing in value to where you could maybe throw him in the flex, and Rachaad White is probably going to be a low-end RB2 to high-end RB3. He's going to be relatively touchdown dependent in order to really pay off for you, in my opinion. But I think he still has a very, very safe floor, especially in a full PPR. I just think that his upside is kind of limited. I don't think we're going to see too many more of those 25-plus point games this season. And so we'll just have to see how this backfield plays out. But I will say the disparity in their efficiency, 6.9 yards per carry for Bucky versus 2.1 for Rachaad White. If that trend continues, I think we're going to see less of a rushing attack with Rachaad White and more attempts for Bucky Irving. If you like what you've heard so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It's free and it lets me know that you want to see more videos like these. Moving on to the Broncos backfield, raise your hand if you thought this was going to be the split of the Broncos running backs, specifically the rush share. I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin was the leading rusher in terms of carries. He had 40% of their rush attempts. Javonte had 32% and Estime had 8%. When we look at the target share, McLaughlin also had an 11.9% target share to Javonte Williams' 4.76. However, Javonte Williams outsnapped him 52% to 35%, and Estime was sparingly used at 4%. It'll be really interesting to see how this backfield plays out, but if these continue to be the splits, I don't think anybody is going to be a good start, and I think just about anybody is going to be a desperation play. I mean, when we look at what Jaleel McLaughlin did with his receptions, sure, he was targeted 5 times and caught all 5 of them, but he only produced 1 total receiving yard with those. And then when we look at Javonte Williams, he was targeted twice and he had 1 reception for nothing, no yards at all. Neither one of them was efficient in any way, shape, or form. Overall, it was just a disaster game for the Broncos. I mean, Bo Nix was arguably the most efficient rusher. Technically, his yards per carry tied that of Audric Estime, but he also did it on 5 attempts to Estime's 2, including the longest gain of any one of these players who rushed the ball this past week with 23 yards. That'll be very interesting if on a weekly basis, Bo Nix is their best running back. And yeah, it'll be really interesting. Not gonna lie, I did not expect the rush share for Jaleel McLaughlin. I would have expected the target share to be in his favor, but man, 40% of the team's rush attempts, that's really good. If this offense can, score more points and be a little bit more efficient on a per play basis, Jaleel McLaughlin may end up being the best bet out of this backfield. But once again, if the splits are like these in general, I probably would avoid this backfield in terms of preferred players in your flex spot, for instance. And if you're desperate, then you're desperate. But yeah, I'll probably just be avoiding this offense altogether. All right, so those are a couple of backfields that we're going to want to continue to monitor throughout the upcoming weeks. I want to say the backfield that I was most surprised by would definitely be Denver's backfield. I did not see Jaleel McLaughlin leading them in rush attempts. But which backfield split confused you the most in week 1? Let me know in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist. If you want to see more videos like these, please like and subscribe. It's free and it lets me know that you want to see more content like this. Thank you and have a good day.